Hi and welcome back to part 8 of this tutorial, where we'll continue after marking the seams on the temple object, and now we'll look at creating the UV layout so we can do some nice texturing and painting on this object. I noticed something where I'd made a mistake, so I want to just go over that now. So I'll zoom in on this object here, and the mistake was around this area. So let me scroll down and select my UV tools here, and I'll choose edge loops. And if you remember, we had this kind of skewing over here. Now I can do two things here. I can change it inside, which is what I'm going to do now. So the reason this is wrong is because of this seam here going down and here. So if I hold Control down on the keyboard and just remove this seam all the way around to there, to that corner. Okay, and I do the same on this side, on this edge as well. Okay, I return it back to how it was before. Instead of placing that seam there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to place it here on this edge loop. And you'll see straight away, just notice in the preview window, when the shape that it's making inside the preview window. And when I hit this seam here, can you see how that straightens that out immediately? So sometimes when you're creating these seams, it's a good idea to just try and see if there's an alternative rather than going with your first option and kind of making do with that. Just try and click in other areas and just see if the algorithm that's flattening this group of polygons out can make a better job if the seam is placed in a different location. So I'm going to do the same here. Remember, the seam was on this edge here going all the way around. Now I'm going to move it to here, and you'll see that the top section here now is also a lot cleaner and straighter, much better for painting on. Another problem area for me here was these two panels. So these two extrusions here, you can see that they're slightly twisted, and again that was all because of I just placed this seam right the way around the edge and forgot to place a seam here. So I'm going to change to mark seams here, and I'm just going to mark individual seams across on these corner pieces here. So if I click here and I click here, you'll see now in the preview window that that's flattened that object out, and I've got a really good surface there for painting on. And the same goes for the top piece here. You can see in the preview we've got slightly twisted UV unwrap on there. So if I just click on these corners 1 and 2, we get a nice flattened object. Now, just a word of warning here, we haven't actually unwrapped anything. We're only previewing our unwrap at this time. So the next stage will be to actually start to unwrap this object properly, and that's what we're going to look at next. Okay, so I've made the UV preview window a little larger as we do this next stage, just so we can see clearly what we're doing. And I have my object, as you can see, on the left side of that window. Making sure that my symmetry is on, so I'll press S on the keyboard, making sure it's on, and it is on the X-axis. Just turn this off. I'll select the virtual mirror option, which gives me a preview of the mirror. And then with that selected, I'll go over to Mesh, and then I will choose Apply Symmetry to All Layers. Now notice this little pop-up box when I roll over this option. It says Apply Symmetrical Mirroring to all layers except hidden. So notice over here I've got my temple, and the two other items they have their visibility turned off, so it's not going to affect these two, which is exactly what I want. So go over to Mesh, choose Apply Symmetry to all layers. Then make sure you turn Virtual Mirror off to have the completed object. So at this point now I can start the unwrap. Remember, I've already got my seams in place, and the preview has already enabled me to check the state of each of these islands and how they will unwrap without actually committing. I need to make sure that I have one of the UV tools here selected, so I will do that now and just choose Mark Seams, and then obviously you'll notice that as I roll over these now, I get a preview of the whole object, not just the half of an object. So you can see how those islands are unwrapping, which is really nice. Now, there's two things I can do here, a normal unwrap, which is what I'm going to do, or auto unwrap. If I go further down here, you'll see I have an option to unwrap, which is basically going to unwrap based on my seams that I've made, or I could just click this, and if I do this, it's going to ignore pretty much all the work that I've been doing in the past tutorials, so I don't really want to do that. But if it is that you need a fast UV unwrap, it's not going to do a really clean job around here in terms of islands, but it will do a good job of just unwrapping it. But I want to create something that I've got a little bit more control over in terms of UV islands, so this is why I'm going to choose the unwrap method. So let's go ahead and click that button. It will go ahead, and there we go, it's unwrapped. Now you can see in my UV preview window a couple of things. First of all, notice how the color on these objects is a kind of a grey color, and that's really important. That's to do with the tessellation of this object. So you'll notice that my simple checker here is displayed now on the UV, are all uniform in their size. Now we know that they're all a different color, but that's based on the UV islands that we marked the seams on. But the actual checker image that's being projected on here is quite uniform in the way that it looks. Even if we go inside and take a look inside here, we can see we've got a nice uniform distribution, and that is where we have this grey color. So that's where these two windows are kind of linked together in terms of the tessellation and the color. So let's do something here which sort of upsets that and changes it. I'm going to choose my island selection tool here and select this island here, and I'm now going to scale this one up. Notice how the color changes. So because this one is now changed color, all the other ones are uniform, this bluish purple color, but this one, because I've increased its UV size, UV space size here, and you can see it's the back face that I actually chose. You can see that the squares now, the checker pattern on here, is a lot smaller and more intense on this one that I've scaled. And if I go the opposite way, and if I reduce that size down and that one goes blue, you'll see that the square sizes go larger, the resolution decreases on this back wall, and the other ones remain in this color. So it's important to make sure, let me just undo those steps, it's important to make sure that all your images, particularly on an object like this, are kind of uniform in their color. We don't want extremes such as the reds and the blues. But what I want to do is just show you a very useful method here of making sure that the orientation of these UV maps is the same, because although this checker pattern looks to be good, I know that the orientation of these islands here are not correct. And to check that, what I'm going to do is go over to Simple Checker and choose Complex Checker instead. And now with the Complex Checker, you can see that my islands actually, although they're nice and even in terms of their tessellation, the UV the UV maps themselves are flipped and vertically and horizontally, and they actually may cause me issues. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to leave this complex checker on, and I'm going to start to change these islands around in my UV space. So let's try and make this a little bit bigger still. I still need quite a bit of real estate for this to work on, and zoom in a little bit more. So here's where we start to select and modify our UV layout. Now, don't forget that this layout here is still not committed. It is a UV layout of this object, but I haven't applied anything yet. So it's kind of like the second stage of my UV, the first being marking the seams. So at this stage, nothing's actually committed for me, and I want to try and start moving these around. Now, I'm going to work between two tools, and this can get a little bit confusing, so I'll go through it slowly. At the moment, I've got my UV tools selected, and that enables me to click on, using the island selection here, to click on in my UV space any of the islands inside the UV space, and you can see them being selected in the normal window. However, if I go over to here and I start to click in this window, you can see it's selecting here. But if I miss one of those selections, let's say for example I click here, then I'm going to be marking seams again, which I don't want. So I don't want to make a mistake where I actually click and mark a seam rather than selecting the island, because that's my goal here. Let me just undo that a couple of times. So one of the things I can do here is because it's a little bit tricky sometimes to find those areas and click on. What I can do is I can actually change my tool to the select tool here, making sure my polygons are selected there. And this is a little bit easier now. I can make sure that because I've only got faces selected on here, that I'm definitely going to only select faces. And you can see here that it's selecting inside there. And if I double click, then it will select everything. Let's just deselect. So if I say select this one, and then I can also click in this window as well. Let me redo that to show you. So I've selected this polygon here, but if I click in the UV window now, I can select that island as well. And I can select the islands in here. So it's just a little bit easier for me to select inside of this tool. And don't forget, Control D will deselect. So I'll start off by selecting this polygon here, and that shows me where that island is on my UV map. And I'll then click on that island. And now one of the other things that I can use on this, and we've used this tool before, is the expand selection tool. So now if I expand, now I'm starting to grow the selection around. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that I select the whole of this top region here up until kind of like this face down here. So I'll continue to hit expand selection until I reach this portion here. Now, look in the UV window, because now it's selected all those items for me in that UV window using that expand selection. And if you notice, I've got a little marquee tool here that I can use and move these around. So if I expand this out here and I move these over, I can start to arrange things. So I know, for example, that this is the very top of my object. So maybe I'll put it in this quadrant here. Okay. Now another thing I can do at this point is I can hide the selection. Because I've finished with this at the moment, I can now hide. So if I go further down here, and you'll see here that I have an option to hide the selected object. So if I do that, that then disappears, and it's no longer kind of visual noise for me to confuse me. So let's repeat this now for the other areas. let's go and select, let's select something a little bit easier actually. Again, it's a case really of just selecting selecting items, the larger items first. So those are those two walls, those two side walls that we have. So with those two selected, I can move those over. Now notice what happened there. I didn't quite get these areas here selected. So that's why I've got now this horrible stretching on there. So let's undo that. So here I can double click on this island, double click on this island, and now move them, and now I don't get that stretching. So I'll move these over to this side like so. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just go through and select all these pieces and then position them just roughly and separate them out into different areas, ready for my final UV layout. So this will be a little bit of a time lapse now and sped up in the video because it's a little bit boring watching this stage. So I'll check back with you once the process is done. So here I am selecting some of the wall pieces at the side. So I'll move those off to the other side and then select the roof section as well. So we have the top part of the roof which is moved down, and then I'm trying to grab the underside of this as well. So I'll manually select the under part of the roof section and pull those pieces in the same quadrant. Here I switch to just moving some of the front pieces and then back to the back of the temple. Hide those objects including the roof. Now on the inner walls, so I'll put those over with the outer walls. Looking at the floor section and the platform area. Again, just grouping those together in that quadrant and then hiding those. Now looking at the front again and the door frame. And that inner compartment there, the entrance area to the temple. Again, always hiding just to make the scene a little bit less complex. These particular areas of the inner compartments are quite fiddly, so just getting all those pieces. Here we've got some of the steps as well. Going back to the front area. And finally we've kind of done most of the work here, and it's just a case now of pulling these final pieces together. Okay, so I've got here most of my elements split out, and I know this may look a little bit untidy, but all I'm doing here is just rearranging the items just so I can see which pieces, you know, belong together and should share a common space in my main UV area. Now there's a couple of other pieces in here that you might have noticed on that last section that look a little bit odd. And these are the pieces which belong to the steps and pillars layer. So when I unwrapped this object, even though these are hidden, they are still part of the unwrap. So if I just enable them here, and this is probably, I would say, a little bug in 3D-Coat here, where although those items were hidden, when I unhide a layer, everything becomes unhidden again. And I would really prefer, if I've made a selection and told 3D-Coat which items I would like to be hidden on my temple layer, I don't want them to appear when I do this. So that's a little thing that you have to be careful of. So I'll do the same here and just unhide these ones as well. Now, I'll make sure that I select the layer that I want to manipulate the geometry on. So if you notice, this is something else. Here we've got one of the pillars. And if I'm on the temple layer here, I can select the pillar here, and you can see I can move that around. If I select the steps here as well, let's say I select, steps here. Let's double click on that one. You can see I can move those around like so. Now, if these objects are hidden, so let's say, for example, I select this front face of the temple here in my UV space, and then I try to move this one, you'll notice it can't. It kind of disappears and stops me from moving it. It's because this is on the temple layer, which is hidden. So inside the UV space, I'm not allowed to touch that, move that object. I can select it, and I can select all the other pieces on that temple layer, but I cannot move them now in UV space. It stops and it automatically deselects it for me. Okay, so that's something that can be a little bit frustrating, and you're wondering why you can't move this object. It's because it's hidden here. So anything that's visible and you selected, so if I select everything on this layer now, you'll notice now I can move this face around. Even though I'm on this, even though I'm not on the temple layer, I can still move that around in the UV space. Okay, so with that done, I've made sure that all my layers are selected here, visible here. And now I can go in and I can start to select these pieces, such as the sides of the steps, and here's the steps object itself. So that's all the stairs object that I've got selected here. Whoops. You can see it's selected there, and in my UV space it's selected here. So it's in the right window, the right UV area. It's just that it's a little bit far apart, and I want to bring these items closer together. So if I do that and bring that to the front where the other front pieces are, that's just going to help me. And here I've got one pillar on this side, and you can see this other pillar is orientated 90 degrees in the other, but we'll deal with those issues shortly. So now I've got all the main parts to the front of my temple in this UV space. You can see here I've got these parts, and I think, yes, these islands here, these two little islands here, are the tops of the pillars. So that needs to come down, and let's get those close to the pillar objects here. So this last section here is the door frame. So all the elements that make up the door frame there are laid out for me here. So again, I'll put this somewhere at the front. Okay, so here we have our items separated out, and you may be thinking, well, this is a real mess here. This isn't probably the best way and the normal way that I would do this. I'm actually just demonstrating how to separate these items out, and just to get a clearer picture of what I'm doing here, because it can get quite confusing if everything's in the same place. So the reason I'm actually doing this is just for clarity during this tutorial. So I've still got my door selected down here, and the aim now is to try and get these objects to kind of orientate properly and be on the same going in the same direction. So let's take a look at this top section that I did at the very beginning. So I'll get my temple layer as the active selection layer here, and you'll notice that the temple itself becomes more of a solid color. And I'll choose this top face here. Now you can see that this is the front of my object. You can see that my UV layout here, it's kind of like the wrong way around. It's sort of a mirrored image, and I don't want that. So if I move that around, you can see the P is backwards, the N is backwards. It's not really working. So I need to have another selection, some more tools here to help me out with this. So you have to make sure that your UV or one of the UV tools here is selected, because that will give us the option here to that will give us some more options down here. And you'll notice I'm not going to use these ones here. I'm just going to hit the space bar, which will give me the same options. So if I hit the space bar here, you can see that the selected item, which is this top face here, space bar, the selected items now give me some options here of what to do with those selected items. So I can either rotate them by clicking these objects, or I can flip vertically or in the horizontal space as well. So there are other options as well, as I can actually unwrap these islands individually, but I'm not going to do that yet. So let's focus on this one and let's try and get its orientation correct. So I'll hit spacebar on here, and I will use the flip U button down here, and you can see now that this is now orientated correctly in our viewport. And that's how I want this to look, pretty uniform in terms of how these letters on my image map here, on my checkered image map, start to look, and I want a uniformity with that. So let's go over here and check this top ledge part here. And if you move these around, if you're not quite sure if it's right or not, you can see this is wrong. So I will move this around and just check. So I'm just checking in this region here to see if the letters are the right way around or not. And they're upside down. So what I can do is hit spacebar and flip vertically, and now check it again. And you'll see that now my letters are in the same direction as this one. So here I'll start to say, right, these two are done. I'll shift them over into this area here because I know those two are orientated correctly. So if I select this one, which is the bottom face here, move it around, let's check. That's the wrong way as well. So I'll orientate that one and flip vertically. Oh, and flip on the U as well. You can see that one's upside down now, so I shouldn't have done that the first time, flipped. And I think that's fine now. Yeah, so that one's okay. So I'll take that one and put it over that side. So now I've got these three islands here, and they're all kind of working. And you'll notice that I've got these islands, which are the corner pieces here. Sorry, the vertical pieces here. And these ones are the wrong orientation as well. So let's flip that way. That one's okay now. Let's try this one. Move around, check its orientation on this side. It's upside down, so we'll flip it vertically. That's fine. So you can see this is the next process really of going through and making sure that our maps are kind of all facing in the same direction, or let's say in a natural direction for painting. The reason I'm moving this around is I'm just checking all the letters on my image map there to making sure I've got it's correct. So what I'll do now is I'll go through and do all of these in the same way. This is an optional step. It really depends how much control over you want over your final texture you need. So I'm going to do this because there's some interesting things to check later on, especially with ones like this, which are still twisted. And there's some nice little tips on how to solve those issues with different mapping methods as well. So I'll join you back once I've got all these sorted and everything's looking nice and straight in terms of the UV map. Okay, so that's the top section of the temple done, and it's all orientated in the same way. Now, obviously, when I'm doing this, you remember I made, you know, some cuts down here and just flattened it all out, and you can see that the more cuts that you make in an object, the more time you have to spend on actually making sure everything's orientated in the same way. So being optimal in terms of your seam creation is really important because it saves you a lot of time afterwards. Again, it all depends on the end result and what you're looking for. Okay, so this is a little tricky part of the model, which you can see the UV map that we actually unwrapped here isn't quite good enough. So what I'll do first of all is just hide these top sections here, which we can do away with now. They're not important, but this section here is a little bit tricky. So with those hidden now out of the way, these objects, I can now focus my attention on this one. So let's zoom in on this area, get it into our viewport, and Control D to deselect, and we can see what we're doing. Right, so I'm going to start simply by making this object kind of like two halves, and I need to put a seam down the center to kind of split that. So I will just deselect again. I'll make sure mark seams is selected, and in my main viewport here I'm going to mark a seam right down the center. Now you'll notice in this window, the UV preview, that this seam that I've just marked here has now turned black. And if I go down here to Update Islands, if I now select this object, you'll notice only half of it now selects. So I've now split this into two UV islands, which becomes a little bit easier to manage. So let's manipulate these islands around and make sure that they are orientated properly. So I'll start with this one as it's selected, and I will rotate in a clockwise direction. That's not done it for me, so let's flip it like so, and that corrects that one. So now it's orientated properly. And let's do the same on this side. So let's now do this one. We'll rotate and flip in the U. Now we've got both those orientated in the correct direction. It still doesn't solve the problem for me. And the problem area is actually here where I put that split. So let's start by, let's select this one first, and let's take away this area here. And we've got this sort of split along here, and you'll notice that I've got these kind of black lines on here, which is a bit of a clue as to why this isn't working for me. What I'll do is use my UV tool again. Let's make sure it's selected, yeah. And over here, let's deselect so we can see what we're doing. I'm going to click on this edge here and this edge here, which makes this completely separate. And I'll do the same on this side here, like so. And I think that one was already done. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, let's go back to our Update Islands option here, and then take these pieces here. Let's move that one and move that one. Move this main island here and these two there. Actually, I'll just bring them down to the space here. So we can see that this can be optimized here and can be made into one single piece. So that's a good exercise for us to do now and see how we actually do that. So as you might have guessed, what I can do here is I can remove the seam down the middle as a starting point. So let's do that. So let me deselect that. Alt click in the center, Alt click on these seams to remove them. And I'll also do the same on this one and this one. So now it's unified in its color, but not on this in this space here. So I'll do that and I'll hit unify, and you'll notice it's gone completely crazy and looks really terrible. But if I select this now and I go up to my UV options here, the selected options, I can unwrap this one separately by hitting to global uniform GU. And when I do that, you can see that this one, it unifies just this island, but at the moment it's kind of unified it extremely small. So let's first of all match the value in the color of gray. That means my tessellation will match. And now I need to just rotate this around to make sure that I'm getting the orientation how I want it. Something like that. So this is a kind of more manual method here that I'm using. Okay, so that's sorted out those pieces there for me. So let's unhide everything. Unhide all. And check out the front of our building here. And if I almost go through the front door and look up, oops, let's try again. There we go. And now I can see these here are kind of orientated slightly wrong, so I'll just make sure I flip in the vertical here, flip in the U, and yeah, that makes a little bit more sense in terms of the natural flow of the map. Okay, so all those objects are now unwrapped, although not very cleanly. As you can see, it's a bit of a mess, but at least we've got a nice orientation of our maps. Everything's makes sense in terms of the direction of the letters on our UV image at the moment. So we know we've got a kind of a good flow going with this. So at this point, I'll just save this object. And now I'll do a little bit of cleanup on here. So you can see here I've still got my cube reference from the very beginning on here. If I turn that on and off. So I don't need that anymore. That was just my initial reference. So with that selected, I'll just hit delete. Okay, so that's that done. And now I'll position and make sure that all these items are in the same place. In the same UV space. I'm not going to make different UDIMs on this. I'm just going to place everything in the same location. And I'm actually going to leave this object here as it is. So I'm not going to change this one. You'll notice that the object that is the inner carving of this is actually skewed quite badly, and that's because of this layout that I've got here. I'm going to keep that mistake in there for now. Right, so the next thing to do is just to pack these together. Now we could do an auto pack on here, and we can use one of these packing options here, or we can do it sort of manually. And what I'm aiming for here is to, I've obviously already made sure that a lot of my items that are similar in location on the model are located in a similar location on the in UV space. So that's already been done. I just need to sort of arrange them a little bit better. Now I'm not going to scale anything here, or I'm definitely not going to rotate or flip anything here, because that will again undo all the work I've just done. I'm just here just going to look and see if I can just optimize the space. So now I've saved this, I'm going to just do one more thing. You'll remember that we've still got our items separated here. And I'm just going to unify all these together. So I'll start by just clicking on the pillars, and I will click and drag when my mouse hovers over this side, those 6 dots. Hold shift down and drop it onto the temple layer. I'll choose the steps, hold shift down and drag it over the top of the temple layer. And now you'll notice that it's unified all those objects for me, like so. Okay. Okay, so with them unified now, I've just noticed a little problem down here where you notice my roof section here is just outside of my UV space, so I need to make sure that that's inside. We can just move these around a little bit. There we go. Just give it some space there. Bring all those in line. Not really necessary, but there you go. And just check around, make sure I've got no overlapping things. Make sure these are kind of level. And one of the reasons for this is that if I want to take this into Photoshop at any point, then I've got, you know, a nice area for me to paint on. It's going to make it much easier for me to paint on these. But to be honest, most of the work I do is actually inside of 3D-Coat, just painting directly on the model. So it's just a precaution, really. It gives me a bit of flexibility if I need it. Okay, that looks fine. So I've merged them all down, all my groups down into a single layer. Now there's an area down here that was a little bit of an issue, and you'll notice here, and this was because of that mirroring issue that we did when we were modeling and splitting these up. So this is where I'm just going to correct this very, very simply here, and I'm going to, with it all sort of laid out from a UV point of view here, I'm going to move up to my move tool, select my points here, and because it's all now on the same layer, I can select a point here and I can snap it to that point there. Okay. Now this is okay for this object because I'm not too fussy about this here, because it's just, I know what's going to be on this texture. So I know that you're not going to see any distortion on this. But if this was a very important area, I wouldn't be using this method. If it was a, you know, a very highly detailed area, or it had a normal map on, something like this, because it would become distorted with those movements that I've just made on the mesh. But in this case, I'm going to just kind of just manipulate it in that way, because I know it's going to be fine. So at this point, I've welded all my objects all the objects together. Let's just double check that the items that I pulled into here are welded as well. I'll just increase my brush size with the mouse wheel, and you can see that these weren't welded. So I need to make sure that those are welded there as well. So it's worth just checking that these are welded there. You can see it just snaps to that point. It's not going to affect our UV map in any way. So again, let's go over to here, make sure this side's selected. That's welded together there. So we're only a few pieces here, so these ones, that's fine. So all I'm doing is just selecting a point and moving it and making sure that all the mesh moves together. Of course, I've got my show open edges as well. So I can see I've got an open edge on there. Let's go around. These two are fine because they are open edges, but I do have a problem on this side here where this one is an open edge that I don't need. So let's go back to the move tool. So that one was fine. Yeah, there's the problem there. So if I just weld that back up, select open edge, and that corrects that problem for me. Okay, so pretty happy with that. Back to the move tool. And I'll do a quick save on that point. And the very last thing for me to do here is to go over to this little tab here. And you can see here that I've got polygroup. Now, this is my polygroup, this object that I've done here. So I don't like the name polygroup, so I'm going to rename it to temple UV and say OK. And then I'm going to go to, whoops, sorry, wrong menu, this menu here, and then I'm going to delete any unused UV, because there is a UV in here called default, and that was from the cube object, my original cube, one that was put down. So I'm going to say delete unused UV, and just refresh that so the temple comes back. So you can see now I've got one UV called temple UV. It contains one temple polygroup here, and here is my UV map. Now, the UV map isn't actually made yet. I've got to do one last operation on this, and that is make sure my UV is selected here. So by selecting these, it gives me the option, it gives me the tools here. So the last option here is to click Apply UV. So that is going to apply everything that I've done so far on here. So do not press UV unwrap again, because that will completely undo all the work that we've done. We've done all the work that we need to do now. It's just a case of hitting apply. It warns me that this cannot be undone. I'll say OK. And there we go. And we'll wrap this video up here, and we will take this now into the paint room in the next video, and we will start to texture and prepare it ready for our final render. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.